Crash Bandicoot. The face of PlayStation was a legit contender to Mario and Nintendo in the 1990s, and I loved playing the games as a kid. And for the last few months, thanks to my recently purchased PlayStation Vita, yeah, I've got the Vita now, I've played more Crash Bandicoot games than I ever have in my life, and I struggle to put them down. There's something about trying to collect everything, the mechanics, the level design, they are simply timeless. These games were developed by Naughty Dog, who would be purchased by Sony after the Crash deal with Universal ended, and would continue their gaming excellence to this day. Unfortunately, by the turn of the millennium, the Crash Bandicoot series was slowly left to rot, going from okay to rubbish to almost non-existent by the early 2010s, moving aimlessly through the Cortex Vortex in the abyss. By that time, there was even debate over who actually owned the rights to the franchise, with one rumor going around that Sony bought it off Activision and that Naughty Dog was going to reboot the franchise themselves. But as much as I would like for that to be true, of course it wasn't. And to add insult to injury, during the 2015 PlayStation Expo, Sean Layden wore a Crash Bandicoot shirt and didn't say a word about it, which obviously created a negative reception. That's how desperate the fans were. Or was the clue for real? The first indication that a new Crash Bandicoot game was a serious possibility was an Easter egg in Uncharted 4, when Nathan Drake is trying to play the original classic on the PlayStation with Alina. Some say it was just to celebrate the 20th anniversary of the franchise, but then another image was posted on PlayStation's Middle East page with a wanted sign of Crash, increasing gamers' curiosity even more. But finally, at E3 2016 during the PlayStation Showcase, the theme played and they officially announced that Crash Bandicoot would be a playable character in Skylanders, and that Vicarious Visions were developing a remaster of the original PlayStation trilogy for the PS4. My reaction was, okay, it's a start. It's sure as hell better than nothing because it's been 6 years. However, I was a little bit annoyed that Naughty Dog weren't involved in any way. They just finished Uncharted 4, the timing was perfect. But then after looking at the trailers of Uncharted Lost Legacy and The Last of Us Part 2 the same year, fist pumping in the air with excitement I might add, it all made sense. I would rather have Naughty Dog focus on those. Instead, it was developed by Vicarious Visions, and the first thing that came to mind when I thought of them was the PlayStation 1 port of Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 4 because I grew up playing that game. But they also developed a lot of Crash and Spyro titles for the Game Boy Advance, as well as Crash Nitro Kart and recently the Skylanders franchise, so they know Crash Bandicoot and how to make a platformer in the 8th generation. After a year of development, the Crash Bandicoot N-Sane Trilogy was released for the PlayStation 4 on June 2017, and on the Xbox One, Nintendo Switch and PC exactly 1 year later. This being called the N-Sane Trilogy, how cute, the collection includes Crash Bandicoot, Cortex Strikes Back and Warped, and everything about it in a fresh coat of paint with a few little additions and tweaks.
This Bandicoot will be my general, and he will lead my Cortex Commandos to world domination!
The plot for all three games are identical, but with a bit more detail, especially in the first game. Everything story-wise is identical from the characters to the dialogue and cutscenes, only less robotic.
Now, free once again, he must be stopped.
Even Crash looks classic. I was worried that this character model wouldn't work in the current generation. I mean, these didn't give me any hope. The reason he looks this way is because the developers at the time didn't want to compromise the power of the PlayStation 1 in the first game, so they didn't give him a real neck. Seriously. But he looks fantastic. I like the way Crash looks when running away from something, the dance celebrations, and even the deaths, apart from this one which could potentially cost you a controller. As for the rest of the game, when it was announced as a remaster at E3 2016, I was a little confused, because that means it's the exact game with a slight graphical enhancement. For example, Jak and Daxter on the PS2 remastered for the PS3. Because these are PlayStation 1 games, I expected the kind of treatment Final Fantasy VII got when it was re-released for the PS4. And no, I don't mean the full remake. How wrong can I be? I honestly think this qualifies as a remake, and it's very easy to be mesmerized by the graphics if you grew up with the original games. It felt incredibly overwhelming seeing the same games that went past 3 generations, and the faithfulness to the originals are everywhere, from the level design to all the character models, sound effects, and soundtrack. though I wish there was an option to play the original music as well. But overall, you can tell this was designed by fans of the original titles, and were determined not to release something like this again. But this is more than just a graphical overhaul with all 3 games in one collection in which the prices for a physical copy never seem to drop. The most obvious difference is being able to play as Coco on most levels, which is a cool idea. This goes for all 3 games, even if Coco was non-existent in the first one. For the first 2 games, you have to beat the first boss to unlock her, and she controls exactly like Crash with the slide and spin attack. None of those martial art moves from the Wrath of Cortex. Considering the unlockable special moves in Warped, it makes sense. Therefore, it doesn't affect gameplay in any way, and it doesn't make sense having her on the journey from a storyline perspective in Cortex Strikes Back, but I like Coco, so it's great to have her blasting through the levels. The controls in general are the same for all 3 games, and by that I mean all 3 individually. For example, the first one doesn't allow you to slide or body slam, the second one doesn't have power-ups, and the third one has all the innovations up to that point. Very faithful, and for the most part it plays really well. Whether you grew up with the series or you're playing for the first time, it's a breeze to learn. And whenever they added something, it makes it better without feeling like too much has changed from the original, like control tips or analog movement for all 3 games. The hog stages are smoother, but still just as hard, along with the motorbike stages because the camera is lower down, the draw distance is longer so you can anticipate oncoming obstacles, and steering is more manageable on tight corners. However, while the controls on the flying stages in the original are inverted, here they're not, and it snapped my brain in half for about a few seconds, until I found out you can change it back, fortunately. Normally I don't like inverted controls in video games, but since I play Warped all my life, it's an exception. And the pole run, jetpack and jet ski stages for some reason don't control as well, a bit too light. But the only thing about the controls that are noticeably inferior to the originals almost the moment you start playing is not being able to jump as far or high. There were literally dozens of moments when I didn't make the jump in places that I didn't even think about in the PS1 titles. It did my head in. It sounds minor saying it out loud. It probably has more to do with me being too used to the PS1 titles, but I promise if you grew up playing these, it will be a recurring nuisance. Which is why I'm using the slide jump in Cortex Strikes Back and double jumped in Warped a lot more than I usually would when playing it on the PS1. It's not 100% accurate. I'd say 90 to 95%, which is still very impressive. Despite those little nitpicks, again, it plays really well, and it goes to show how well the mechanics have aged. Besides, anything wrong in the N-Sane Trilogy is nothing compared to the 1996 original. Going back to my review of Crash Bandicoot on the PS1, I remember being very critical of the controls compared to its successors. Here, when you attack while moving, you don't stop moving even after letting go of the D-pad, and sometimes you just fall through the platform. It's little things like that which give it a difficult reputation, and often lead to cheap deaths. It feels too heavy. The N-Sane Trilogy is able to polish most of the issues out so that it's way more fun to play, but since the level designs are identical, it's almost just as challenging. Sticking with the first game, they did include a few ways to add mercy to your experience. And I mean a lot of mercy, like on the bonus stages, you can now attempt as many times as you want, although they count as part of the crate total on a level. I remember going through this Dr. Brio stage on Slippery Climb, contemplating over how people could be patient enough to collect everything, and that you had to do the level all over again flawlessly just to have another go at the bonus stages. Madness. On top of that, if you die too many times on one spot, you'll be given an Aku Aku power up, 2 if you're still struggling, and if you lose a life and respawn on a checkpoint crate, you can still get the gem. It's easy to forget just how brutal the first game was. If you go back to it expecting it to be like Cortex Strikes Back or Warped, you'll get your head bitten off. Although the cryptic nature is completely unaffected. But after my experience with the original games, it's not as frustrating. But I can imagine first timers definitely and understandably suggesting otherwise. But it's also what makes these games so good and satisfying to play. Collecting gems, unlocking secrets, and the alternate ending. But what's different in the N-Sane Trilogy is adding relic time trials to these two games as well. I can understand that. It's a series staple and increases the replay value and challenge. However, these levels, the first two games, aren't designed to be beaten as quickly as possible. Like I said about the first game, they're a struggle just to survive. To get a platinum relic would be insane. Or if you think that isn't enough, the N-Sane Trilogy also introduces a couple of new levels. One that was cut from the first game, Stormy Ascent, because it wasn't finished in time and for being too difficult, which is saying a lot. Even on the loading screen it says, good luck, you're gonna need it. I'm just lost for words. I tried this level after beating Cortex with 37 lives to spare, and lost every single one. I couldn't beat it. And to think there's a relic for this stage, I mean, hard games have to exist, I guess. If Stormy Ascent was in the original PS1 game, I wouldn't have even bothered reviewing the series out of frustration. Just unbelievable. Fortunately, the other level, which is brand new for the N-Sane Trilogy, Future Tense, isn't as hard. Barely. Okay, if you're playing through it like you were getting the crystal, it's a good little level with a hint of the difficulty of the first game. But like the secret stages, there are only gems and relics, so it will give you a hard time. I wish the developers could have made more than just one level. Why not make another warp room with 5 more levels after earning extra relics? Maybe in the future? No pun intended? So, is it worth getting this trilogy even if you already have the originals? I say yes, it is. At the very least, I prefer the N-Sane version of the first game. The production value is obvious, there's enough new content without compromising what made them classics to begin with, and buying it increases the chances of Activision potentially releasing an all brand new game. I mean, the Spyro trilogy has also been reignited, and Crash Team Racing isn't far away. I was skeptical that Vicarious Visions weren't up to it, but they proved me wrong. It's a great collection for those who loved the series in the past, but only have an 8th generation console or PC. If all copies of the original mysteriously vanished, and the N-Sane Trilogy was the only way to play these games, I'd be okay with that. And with over 4 million copies sold on the PS4 version alone, it proves that the series still has a loyal fan base, and is still as popular as it was back in the 1990s.